This is episode 102, How to Handle Feedback from Others. Sometimes feedback, opinions from others is helpful, but sometimes it isn't. Discover how to tell the difference and how to rebuild your confidence if you felt undermined. Hi, I'm Carla Rieger, and this is the MINDSTOry Speaker Podcast. So lots of my clients come to me feeling disheartened by negative feedback they receive from others. Other times they notice they keep themselves stuck because they're hungering for positive feedback. Now, this negative or positive feedback could be from clients, prospects, family members, colleagues, coworkers, bosses, neighbors, or just other people you know or don't know on social media. What I want to talk about today has been very important for a lot of people I've worked with, for myself and colleagues. I believe it can relieve you, free you up from people's opinions. I'd like to give you permission to not be dependent on feedback from others. We often get this programming in school and from our parents to be dependent on feedback from others, because it's very easy to manipulate a person's behavior with threats of criticisms or the carrot of accolades. And we have to get told when we're young, you need to be able to take criticism. It's the only way you can learn and develop. And if you don't want to take that criticism, then there's something wrong with you. You're too fragile, you're too much in your own world, you're selfish. So what I'm saying is that I think many times the best course of action is not to take any heed of either positive or negative feedback. Now, of course, there's a few occasions where it is useful, and we'll talk about the difference. This can be especially important if you are now putting up content online or running meetings online where people can leave comments that are anonymous. So they say whatever they want to say, and often that feedback is being run by a personal agenda, and it's just not helpful. For example, there are people who like the fact they can say whatever they want without anyone knowing who they are, so they decide to vent and do it in a mean-spirited way. They just need an outlet. On top of that, there are paid trolls whose job it is to say nasty things, say on social media, to certain targets. In those cases, you can tell by the kind of language and tone they use that it's one of those kind of people, and you can just disregard it. They want you to get upset, and if you just don't take the bait, it takes the wind out of their little sails, and they'll probably just go pick on someone else. Now, if you're giving information that's factually incorrect and a person is pointing that out, and they can back that claim up, then great. You can say, I stand corrected. But sometimes people just say, there's no proof of that claim, yet they actually have no proof that it isn't true. For example, I remember when you could smoke on planes. I was a kid flying to Europe, sitting near the back of the plane, and dozens of people were chain smoking the whole way. My mother told the flight attendant, known as a stewardess at the time, that their smoking was harmful to everyone's lungs on the plane, and it would be great if they stopped. And she tutted at my mother and said, there's no proof that smoking is harmful. At the time, there actually wasn't much proof, but the stewardess also had no proof that it wasn't harmful. Now it's accepted as fact, and no one is allowed to smoke on airplanes. So when skeptics or media companies or platforms say there's no proof, without much to back that up, they're doing the exact same thing they are accusing others of. So a general rule is, if they can back up what they're saying with a legitimate source, I go check it out and decide for myself if I want to alter what I say or do based on that fact. For example, I told a story during a speech about a 1940s reconnaissance flight over the Sahara and showed a picture of the plane. And a man in my audience came up to me afterwards and said, that plane wasn't invented until the 1950s. He was a military buff. So I checked it out and he was right. So I switched the image to a typical kind of plane that did reconnaissance missions in the 40s. Giving a lot of credence to other people's opinions can make you unconsciously or consciously start editing yourself, veering away from your own truth just to be liked. You listen to the comments, the good ones and bad ones, and start behaving in a way to please both of them, hankering after more of the good ones and hopefully avoiding the bad ones. Very few people have actually learned how to give proper feedback. So by proper feedback, I mean non-judgmental, not mixed up with their own opinions, not filtered through their own consciousness bias or unprocessed emotions or through this personal or hidden agenda. They're giving it simply with the intention of being constructive, where it comes from a place of neutrality, respect, value for you, and truly wanting a good outcome for you and all concerned. Now, even when people think they're being neutral, I'm just trying to be helpful, they think they're being unbiased, often they don't have the awareness and sovereignty of mind to truly be that way. So think of a piece of feedback you once got where the person said they were just trying to be helpful, but you had this feeling inside there was a hidden agenda where it didn't feel helpful. Case in point, a client of mine spoke at an event on leadership. She had a very different approach than most of the other speakers. Her philosophy was more collaborative, more about empowering people rather than having power over. Now, she didn't say that directly, but her examples of how she handled union management issues in her role implied that was her philosophy. The person who suggested she speak, who brought her on, really loved her presentation and thought she did an amazing job. So did about 50% of the audience. The other 50% gave her negative feedback, not just on her content, but on her delivery. And it was this cognitive disconnect for her, for the person who invited her to speak, and even for those in the audience that loved it. They started arguing amongst themselves in the audience about that speaker. In studying the situation with her, we realized that the 50% who gave her negative feedback tended towards a less collaborative approach. They liked the speakers who talked of a more traditional approach, with a more hardline way of dealing with dissenters, keeping decision-making down to one or a very small group of people. Now, is one form of leadership better than the other? Not necessarily. It's an opinion. In both cases where the feedback was negative or positive, it was mostly driven by the person's philosophy on leadership, their value system, the kind of environment they came from, what helped them feel effective and safe as a leader. It was so clear in reading the evaluations. But she really let the negative feedback get to her. It brought down her confidence. It made her decline some other invitations to speak. She tried reading the good evaluations to feel better, which would work for like a day, and then she'd start thinking about the bad evaluations. Meanwhile, her creative work in the world was stagnating. She started second-guessing herself. Was she really doing the best leadership style? It's only when we got down to what's important to her. What does she feel she's here to do in the world? What does she want to leave people with when she's gone? What kind of response does she want to have in the people that she leads? And once she ground back into her purpose, her vision, her mission, her focus for her work, she could let go of all the evaluations, good and bad. In fact, after that, she never read any evaluation forms. Of course, she did want to improve, so when she wanted to improve, she hired a coach. She worked with a mastermind group that gave her deep, detailed feedback. They were all really experienced in what she was trying to do, so the feedback was very useful, very constructive. In those cases, the people giving the feedback did it in the way she asked them to, with the right intention. Usually with a short evaluation form on a presentation, when a person has like one sentence to express themselves, it's not that useful. So it's important to be very clear on what you will allow and what you won't. Of course, people are entitled to their opinion, and you can ask them to keep it to themselves. How people say, hey, do you want my opinion? You can politely and neutrally say, Not right now, thanks. I just want to stay focused on my direction. Now, if you cannot stop them voicing their opinion and you sense it might negatively affect your relationship with them, to decline their feedback, you can listen and thank them for sharing. Then just meditate on it and sort out what is useful and what isn't. You don't have to make the person wrong for having an opinion. You don't need to complain about them, criticize them, give them negative feedback for giving you negative feedback. You can just listen and say you will consider it. And the reason I say that is because, for example, I had this colleague who loved to give unsolicited feedback. He would never ask, hey, do you want my opinion? He would just give it. I think you should get a coach certification from so-and-so organization. Of course, I already had lots of different types of training and coaching, but I know that that particular organization was where he studied, and he thought that anyone doing coaching should study there. On this occasion, I told him why I chose to not take his advice. But then it turned into a bit of an argument where it was clear he wanted me to capitulate to his point of view and wouldn't back down until I did. I kept saying, hey, let's just agree to disagree, but he wouldn't let it go. I finally just had to walk away from the conversation because it was getting exhausting. After that, whenever he gave his unsolicited advice, I would just say, thanks for sharing that. I'll think about it. And then switch the topic. Then I would mull over it. Then I would decide whether any of it was useful or not and just let it go in my own mind. So in some cases, with some people, you might want to pick your battles when it comes to them wanting to share their opinion. Now, if the feedback is in regards to your relationship with them, things that go on between you and the relationship is important to you, like it's a spouse or someone you live with, then that's a different matter. Let's say your spouse doesn't like the fact that you don't clean up your lunch dishes right after you eat lunch. You leave them in the sink. Their feedback is that you should clean them up right away. So now we're talking about what's important in terms of how we share the living space, and there's a preference involved. And that's where the art of negotiation comes in. How do you find a win-win outcome? Now, there's a big difference between someone stating a preference and giving an opinion about how you should behave. My preference is that you do the dishes after you have your lunch. An opinion is that you're a slob and inconsiderate because you leave your dishes in the sink. The first one is much easier to deal with than the second. Many people just don't know how to get clear on their preferences and negotiate them in a respectful way. And instead of focusing on facts and the task at hand, they make it personal. They make this leap of thought between what you did and who you are as a person. That's why in those cases, you might need to look underneath the opinion to find their preference for them if they just aren't skilled in that way. Now, I know that's trickier to do if they're attacking you or your character, but if you care about the relationship, it's worth the effort. You'll hopefully demonstrate a better way of communicating in the process. So they say they don't like something. What's the opposite? What do they want instead? What do you think they want instead? So you called me inconsiderate. What's happened that made you say that? You left all your dishes in the sink like you always do. Okay, I left my dishes in the sink, so what do they want instead? Me to not leave my dishes in the sink, to clean them up. I bet that's it. So, you prefer I clean the dishes right after lunch? Yes. So you mean all the dishes rinsed to put in the dishwasher? Yes. And wipe the counters down? Okay. And then you can decide if you want to do that. And if you don't want to do that, what happens between you? And then you can give them your preference for how they give feedback. But the more you focus on what you want the person to do, why you want them to do it, get specific, instead of what you don't want and doing a character assassination, make it clear what will happen if they don't do it. Like they're going to put the dirty dishes on your bed or on the counter so they can use the sink, or you have to put $5 in a donation fund if you don't do the dishes right after you eat your lunch, or whatever you want to negotiate. You just find something that's going to work for both of you, that's mutually agreeable. The more likely you're going to sort it out. If you just go spouting off your opinions, you're probably just going to create more of a chasm of misunderstanding and hurt. Because you see, most of us grew up in a school system where we were graded and judged and given feedback and experienced negative or positive comments by teachers, by peers, sports coaches, music teachers. For higher education, we had those entrance exams. At work, we have those performance evaluations, and on and on. So you start to think, well, that's just how to do it, right? But there's some interesting statistics that show that some of the most creative, innovative people in the world had this innate wisdom to not listen to feedback, especially badly delivered feedback. They let it bounce off them like water off a duck's back. And they went on to do what they felt was the right thing to do. And you might think to yourself, well, what about those people who end up becoming criminals, not listening to feedback? So here's my thought on that. My mother worked in juvenile social services for like 35 years. And I did a lot of training for people in social services, communication training, and did a lot of interviewing and surveying with people like that. And, a lot of people in that profession, the ones that say worked with juvenile delinquents, they actually thought they did the opposite. They actually listened to all the negative feedback, took it on, especially the badly delivered feedback, and made it true about them, took it on like a character in a bad play. They pretended maybe to be the rebel. They pretended that they didn't care. But a lot of their criminal behavior actually came from the fact that they took on the negative behavior. They felt bad about themselves, and they felt bad about the world they grew up in. This wasn't always the case, but more often than you would expect. So it actually would have been better for them if they didn't listen to the feedback. So a good rule of thumb is if you feel like something is not working in a relationship or your work or project you're on, you can ask for feedback, but give people guidelines for how you want to receive it. Like when I work with editors on my books, for example, I often ask people to do a sample edit first. If they give comments that include a suggested change and why they feel that's important and what they suggest instead, that's cool. They give an example, that's great. Maybe they use track changes so I can see what I said, I can see what they said. I will seriously consider hiring that kind of editor. If they just say something like, this doesn't read well, this is sloppy writing, this part here, I don't like it, and just cross the whole thing out and rewrite it, then I don't want to work with them. In a close personal relationship, tell the person what kind of feedback you're open to, how you'd like to receive it. Like it needs to come from a place of neutrality, a good intention. It needs to be said in terms of what they want instead. Now, they don't give the feedback that way the first time. I work with them to help them learn how I like to receive feedback. I give them examples if they're open to it. No one's perfect. It's hard to extract yourself from your own personal opinions, biases, hidden agendas. So if the relationship is important to me, I'll work with the person until we can find a way to communicate in a way that works for both of us. But if the person is just spouting off their opinion because they feel like it, and it's a distraction to me, I'll just either not look at it, not listen, or just disregard it, take what's useful and let the rest go. And it's not me being disrespectful to the person, it's just that it's a boundary issue. It's like when someone hands me a piece of, say, vanilla sponge cake, and it's a birthday cake, but I'm allergic to flour and I don't like vanilla and I don't like sponge cake for that matter. I decline the cake. It doesn't mean I disrespect the person whose birthday it is. I can raise a glass in honor of them. My presence at their birthday event is what matters. But I say no to the cake because it doesn't serve me to eat it. Now, if you do get undermined by people's feedback and it's not coming from someone who's skilled at giving feedback, I give you permission to not even look at it, not even listen to it. If you can't avoid the feedback, I give you permission to think about the filters it came through, what might be the person's conscious or unconscious agenda in giving it to you. Not make them wrong, it's just that most humans aren't very good at neutrality. And thirdly, if you find yourself hungering for positive feedback and you're not getting it, or you keep altering your behavior to try to win positive feedback, you're wasting your life force energy. For example, I coach people who are coaches. And one of my coaches had a practicum client who was essentially what I'll call uncoachable. It was an old friend from school, and he warned her that anytime anyone tried to help him, he would just blanketly reject what they said. But she insisted on coaching him, and sure enough, every suggestion she made, he found fault with. He didn't like what she said, how she said it. I told her, look, he warned you. And she said, yeah, but I bet I'm the one person who could really help him accept what I'm saying. And I'd really love him to just appreciate me for all the work I'm doing. So she kept bending over backwards and doing way beyond what they agreed to in terms of their coaching relationship, and still nothing she did was good enough. And at the end of the coaching series, she felt completely demoralized. But I actually thought it was a really important experience for her to have. And the next time someone like that warned her ahead of time, where it was clear they were uncoachable, she declined coaching them. Why waste your energy on someone who's just going to block everything you say and do? It doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve them. It's okay to walk away and not make the person wrong. They just don't want coaching. Sure, there might be something for you to learn in terms of maybe how you're coaching. If they can give you specifics and say it in a way that's respectful, then that's fine. But if you sense they're just one of those people that likes to nitpick, complain, and demoralize people because that's their modus operandi, that's how they survived in the world, then recognize that ahead of time and just create a boundary. Many top people in the world of speaking, online or offline, many people who are innovative change leaders in their businesses, organizations, say they actually don't pay attention to bad feedback or good feedback unless it's from a very trusted source, from someone who is very skilled at giving the kind of feedback they need and has the experience that would make sure it's useful at a time they are open to it and ready to receive it. I think in general, that's a good guideline when it comes to feedback in the world. If you're really connected to your own inner wisdom, if you have a good moral compass, if you care about doing good work, if you care about the people you're in relationship with, then just take that route. Go by your own inner compass. Be a light unto yourself. Trust your instincts. Do it your way. And let this inner sense of rightness be your guide and not other people's opinions. Okay, that's it for today. I hope that was helpful. Please hit subscribe if you'd like to hear about other episodes. Until next time, thanks for listening.